Okay, I will call this budget workshop of the Pawtucket School Committee to order at 6:03. Ms. List, will you please take a roll call?
Hello. Here. Ms. Grant. Here. Mr. Knight. Here. Mr. Larby. Here. Mr. Marino.
Here.
Ms. Doobie.
Here. I'll just clarify if Mr. Marino is just observing or if he wants to be marked as participating. If Hirsch, did you have a communication with him? Can you check if he wants to be marked as here? Okay. Mr. Marino, you want to be marked as here? Okay, thank you. Okay, please rise for the pledge of allegiance.
Yes, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, our first item on the agenda is new business discussion action items, public hearing, presentation of fiscal year 23 budget. I'll turn this over.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. CFO Melissa Devine and I are bringing to you our presentation on the fiscal 23 budget. So we are showing it up there, and we'll just go through. You have the actual documents before you, but we're going to pull out some highlights of some of the revenue and some of the increases and decreases and where we are moving. So if you can just go to the next slide. First, when we talk about budgeting, there's a process, and I just want to make sure that everyone understands the process of what you do when you determine a budget. The first thing you need to do is evaluate and prioritize what the needs are amongst the district and, you know, optimal programming for the district. So that is done district-wide. That's done with all of our directors and all the departments. The next thing we do is prepare projected enrollments and program costs. And then we're here this evening presenting to the school committee for approval. And then we move on from there. Now, after tonight, after discussion and this workshop, then we will be coming to the school committee on April 12th for an actual vote of the budget approval. And then it would go to the mayor for consideration to the city council. And then what happens, as you know, the state is preparing their budget, and we often don't really know what the actual figures are. A lot of what we do is estimation until we get the actual state budget. And that comes out more towards the end of the school year, June. And that's why over the summer, with any retirements and things like that, and the actual state budget, we come back in August with a firm budget into the school year. So you could go to the next slide, Hirsch, and Melissa, if you want to speak to the funding sources, and then I'll speak to the impacts on education.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. The funding sources for our budget before you this evening is the governor's recommended budget holds LEAs, the local education agencies, harmless for all average daily membership reductions from 22 and 23. So what that means is that the governor is going to reinstate our budget level to FY22, which was the higher of FY20 or 21. And I believe that we were higher in FY20. We could have a possible reduction if not held harmless for the charter school growth. We'll talk about that. It's 626,000. We'll talk about that a little more, and I can show you the state aid and where that would affect us. Categorical funding, that's the funding in addition to the general aid that we get from the state, and it consists of group home aid, multilingual learner aid, high cost special education. And the last piece of the funding formula is called non-public transportation offset. This is not recognized as a revenue, although it's considered aid, but it's taken as a credit on invoices for our statewide transportation.
So two of the things that, the biggest things that I see that impact education and where we are right now are enrollment and staffing. And I'd like to speak to both of those. You may have read in the newspaper, in the Providence Journal over the past several weeks or over the past several months regarding enrollment in the state of Rhode Island. And what we have all heard is that enrollment in the state of Rhode Island is and has been on the decline. And I think some of the numbers that they threw out that I saw were it could be 4,500 to 5,000 students over this last 2 years of COVID. So a lot of people think, well, enrollment is down, so let's just cut teachers. And, you know, I want to speak to this because this is what I've heard out there, and maybe you have as well. And I want to state up front that, in my professional opinion, we are in a time where we are coming through the most horrendous time that we've probably all lived in history. And our kids more than ever need us, and they need staff before them. They need teachers in their classroom. And so this is not the time to be thinking about cutting teachers to save money in any staffing and budget shortage. I say that to say that in Pawtucket, the way our numbers have been affected by this somewhat of a decrease is about, Hirsch and I had, we had talked about this. We're looking at probably about 350 students as the reduction since pre-pandemic. But those 350 students are not sitting in one building all by themselves, in one class. 350 students spread out across 300 students across 16 schools across probably, I think we have close to 400 or 500 classrooms. So we are not in a situation where we can say we can put, you know, students, like say 2 or 3 students that there might be an opening at one school and then 2 or 3 students over here and try to join that. We're not in a situation where we would be looking to do that at the elementary level. So when we talk about enrollment, to me, I look at it in 2 tiers, elementary and secondary, because they're 2 totally different animals, and the way you put students in classrooms are very, very different. So at the elementary level, when you look at enrollment, you have students who are in their classroom and they're with that teacher that full amount of time. So what this means at the elementary from K 1, 2, and 3, you could have up to 23 students in a classroom. And 4, 5, and 6, you could have up to 28 students in a classroom. So when you start to break out the 350 students, you might have maybe 100, 125 that would be at the elementary. You're spread out between 10 schools. It's 1 or 2 students here. It's actually the time that we need to have a little bit smaller classrooms to mitigate learning loss and to catch up on what we know that we lost through this pandemic. So the enrollment of these classrooms, what we do at the elementary is we look at opening and closing based on those numbers. So my 2 assistant superintendents, Ramsey and Rabbit, we have been looking at those numbers over the 10 schools, and we have been able to open and close based on the numbers, keeping them within a reasonable number, not going over, open and close, and saving a net of 3. So that means at the end of the day, 10 schools, 200 classrooms, we can say we can close 3 classrooms. However, with that being said, that's 3 teachers. I would not ever recommend putting 3 teachers out and saying we don't need those 3 teachers, because most of the time those 3 teachers are those newest ones that have come to us. They likely have special ed certification and L certification. And not only that, we know, as Melissa will speak to a little bit later, that we have retirements that we're expecting. So what we wouldn't want to do is say, okay, we don't need these 3 teachers, we're going to lay you off, and then we know that we do need them because we're going to get retirements, and now we're not going to get them back. There is a huge staffing shortage across the United States. Unfortunately, people are not going into education, as we know, and that's teachers, that's administrators, that's across the board. And so, like I said, I know I'm pushing hard on this, but I think it's really important for people to understand that this is not the time to be thinking that we can cut teachers. Now, when you move to the secondary, it's a totally different situation. Our secondary students we might see a loss between our 3 high schools of 100, a little over 100 students. However, we actually just increased the teachers there. And if you recall, back in the fall, we did this under ESSA. So we don't have, it's not like we're going to be saving in our local budget by trying to cut those teachers, because those teachers that we added to supplement and to make a better schedule for students so that they had programs and they were going to get their needs met, it actually was done in our ESSA budget. So that's basically staffing and enrollment together. And I will certainly, if you have any questions, because I know it's a very, particular, it's a very, it's not just like a one size fits all when you talk about enrollment and or staffing.
Ms. Grant?
Williams, in regards to the 350 students approximately, where have they gone? Are the parents teaching them at home, homeschooling, or are they actually looking to go to other schools, right? Charter schools, Catholic schools?
And that's a really good point. So thank you for, I'm going to get to that answer, but I just wanted to say one other thing. I think over these next 2 years, as we're mitigating learning loss and making sure we have teachers before our students, and when we got the right programs in place and we're moving forward, when we get into 24, 25, or even the fiscal year 24, we really want to be considering and looking at this bigger picture in tracking where, like you said, what is happening? Is this just a COVID effect? Are they not coming? Are they moving into other areas, or have they gone to charter schools and or homeschooling? To answer that question, yes. So if you recall, in the fall, we brought before you twice, right? In the fall, I think it was 130 something homeschooling, and then we came back within the 15. So right there, you have half of your numbers right there that went to homeschooling. However, I will say that of those, 15 have already returned. Yes.
How do you know
Yes.
when they return?
Yes, because they let us know, because they're back into our system. So the good thing is that 15 have already returned. So we don't really know. I will say our kindergarten enrollment this year was down, right? So that could be the COVID, whether they didn't want their children wearing a mask, or they were concerned, or they wanted their children, whatever it might be. But I do think that it's something that we're going to have to consider over the next 18 months. And Melissa and I were talking about it earlier today. Once we get through this budget season, then it's the time now to really start analyzing the vision of the future, and really start to do that, because there are all these unanswered questions. We don't know COVID effect, or what about universal pre-K? Universal pre-K is coming down the road, so that means that's going to affect our enrollment. So if we have more students coming into our building with universal pre-K, they are going to likely stay and become our students. So that's why I say, when I hear when I hear responses from people flippantly, well, you have 300 less students, just cut teachers. It's not. That's not how it goes, and you have to really look at where the vision is. And then, like I also will say that you have 2 schools brand new that we're building, right? Winters and Baldwin, right? Winters is going to have their brand new school. Baldwin is going to be housed at the annex, and then we're going to have some overflow in Winters. But when we have those 2 new schools, that falls into that 18 months, 24 months that we should be discussing a long-term vision. What does this mean? Winters is going to be built with, the capability of additional students. Baldwin, like the same. So there's these things to consider going forward. I hope I answered your question.
So I understand not cutting teachers, and at the same token, we have a lot of support staff that I would hate to see go anywhere. What is your considerations on that?
So support staff, the same thing. We have not, in this budget, there isn't a cut of support staff. And basically what I'm saying is, across the board, we need our educators. It's more time than ever. This is the time to make sure that we have educators in our buildings servicing our students. I will say this, that, and I know Melissa's probably like, can I get to my part? But I'm very passionate about this. You know, we have worked really hard through COVID to provide the best programs we can for students and to make sure that they have teachers in their classroom. And we are not, fortunately for us, in a situation where we're seeing situations like we see across the state where they don't have teachers, and we really want to do the best that we can to keep our educators with us. So we have the programs, we put a lot of funding, as we'll talk about when we get there, into programs and curriculum and supplemental materials. We've got the facilities, we're working with our facilities, and we need to make sure that we have our educators. So when you put those three things together, I think it's setting us up for success and future success. And I'll also mention that when you talk about the high schools and we talk about how we pushed in those extra supports, teachers for it through ESSA, remember that our high schools are particularly have a watchful eye because their priorities, the two traditional high schools are priority schools, which means that, you know, they have that comprehensive school improvement status. So they need to make sure that the students not only have the programs, but have the teachers before them.
Oh, yeah, Ms. Grant.
Are we understaffed?
I would not say that we were understaffed. We still have a few positions. I believe, do we have about 8, 10 that are not filled? But I wouldn't say that we were understaffed. However, if I could wave my magic wand and have more staffing, I would say that it would be wonderful, because if you have even, Mrs. Bonola mentioned support staff, more support staff, particularly at at both levels, but particularly at the elementary, you know, because we're talking about trying to make up for loss. And even if you have a classroom of 23 and you might have an interventionist coming in here and there, or you might have a support staff coming in here and there, if we were in a situation where we could have even more support staff, that would be awesome.
So when you say 8 to 10, are you talking about actual teachers throughout the district?
Yes, teachers throughout the district.
So how are we covering those classes? Because I'm assuming the middle and the high school are classes that they're particular classes. Where the elementary, I know it's
Yeah.
the full, you know, the full class. It's everything.
Right.
One.
It's well coverage. It's not just for those classes, but coverage in general. Whenever anyone is out, you know, you at the secondary level, basically the teachers and they could speak to it. They're covering, you know, classrooms. And in some cases, I do believe, I would have to ask Mrs. Rabbit, but I do believe at the secondary level, at one point, I don't know if it's now, if there was a secondary teacher out and there was someone in that content area that was available, would they be covering those classes? Substitutes, okay, all right. So, yeah.
Teachers.
Yes,
Those substitutes, are they fully credentialed, or are they emergency hires?
Lee, would you be able to speak to that?
Yeah, we have two different types of substitutes. We have certified substitutes. They carry a certificate from Florida, from the education. We don't have many of those. I would be honest, we have a good short of those. And the other types that we have are students have college degree. In some cases, they may have 2 years, they may have to be first, like they need to be a program. They can also qualify.
How many of those are there?
Do you know how many?
How many non-certificated teachers are there? Substitute, how many of them are there?
Probably on the difficult question, because we carry a number of them on our.
You might want to come to the.
Sorry, people on Zoom can't hear. Sorry.
have,
Yeah, I can get you the exact number and I'll send it to you, but it's between 80 and 100. What happens is we register people to substitute and we use a system called Frontline. It's used by almost every district in Rhode Island. And so substitutes can sub in numerous districts, and we actually can see in Frontline that they're subbing in another district as well. And the substitutes can have the ability to pick the days that they want to sub. So every substitute we have does not substitute every day. Some we are reluctant right now to be taking them off unless we have a really clear understanding that they don't want to sub anymore, because obviously we're trying to increase the number of subs we have in classrooms. We we have classrooms that go uncovered every day.
Yes.
Mr. Knight.
What's the difference between paying a substitute and a regular teacher?
Pay for a substitute and a regular teacher.
Our school committee policy on that, I'm not sure if Ms. Devine has it. I remember we amended it. And I believe I was still on policy when that happened, so
25 is the current rate right now for a sub during the pandemic.
Who's certified?
Certified,
Yes.
correct.
How much?
$225 per day.
And if they're not certified, what are we paying them?
100.
175.
175.
I don't think so.
125.
They're on the pen. 125.
You know, we could get those numbers.
We could, someone could reference it.
I'll get
It's
them for
making
you.
a huge difference on what we're budgeting at this point, because it's going to be that much less that we're spending this year. And from the looks of it, it looks like we're gonna have that problem next year too.
I'm not sure I understand your,
Are we gonna have 100 substitutes and certified, non-certified next year?
well, you have, so going back to, I think what the original question was, are we fully staffed? No, we're not fully staffed. We have 8 to 10 openings. Those are long-term substitutes, which is slightly different than your day-to-day subs when people are out, when teachers are out. So we will always need subs because we have close to 800 staff, and there's going to be teachers out, you know, and for various reasons. So we will always need substitutes. So I'm not sure I understand what you're.
How many permanent positions are filled right now?
Permanent, long-term.
Not long-term. Permanent positions are being filled by certified and non-certified employees.
Do you have that?
I'll
You'd have to
I'll
get
have
it.
to get that to you. That changes by the day, to be honest.
Hey, Ms. Rathod, can you clarify, is our current sub pool lower than it usually is?
Our current sub pool was low. We have built it up through the year, but we're seeing less people subbing. So while they may sign up to sub, that doesn't mean they're actively subbing in our schools. So in previous years, we absolutely had more subs in the classroom.
And Ms. Devine, with that question, our past fiscal year or up to this date, are we seeing districts saying that they have a lot of money left over in their sub budget because they just haven't been able to expend it on subs?
Right, so we're overspending in the class coverage area.
Because every time a teacher covers and in the contract, it says that they get paid
So
money
we
for
would
that.
offset that with the sub lines.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Grant?
So say for example, we have a substitute teacher who's teaching in the elementary school right now, and they're there for long term. But at the end of the year, the teacher comes back. But we realize this substitute teacher is a really good teacher, and we shouldn't lose them. How do we as a district, or do we obtain this teacher to make sure? So for example, you would think the younger students coming out of college are going to be looking for something permanent, because of course they're going to need benefits and things like that. So if there's so of course, they're going to go to, of course, there's going to be a Providence, there's going to be a Barrington,
Right.
there's going to be other places. But if we know, I don't know, like, is it a time to put in, like, hire teachers who are floaters in a building or something like that, to kind of be like, not, I don't want to say permanent substitute, because they don't obviously qualify for benefits and get a salary of that. But do we have a plan for something like that, so we don't lose those teachers who have really proven themselves to us and that we could really maybe try to obtain?
Right. So I don't, Ms. Rabbit will probably want to speak to that, but I do want to say this, that I can tell you in other districts, I know in Massachusetts, some districts in Massachusetts, what they do is they actually hire what they would call a permanent sub, but it would be a teacher, so that they don't lose a good teacher, and they put them on that first step, and they actually assign them to a building. And I really do like that idea. That is something that we have talked about. I don't know that we have the availability at this time in this particular budget when we go on and we see, but it is something that I think that would be wise, for us to move into. Did you want to respond to that, Lee? Because we've talked
So
about it quite a bit.
we do, on some of the places we recruit both student teachers and our substitute pool. So student teachers, especially this time of year, are just finishing up. We offer them to substitute for the rest of the year. Once they have a student teacher teaching certificate, they are considered a certified teacher. So once they finish their studies, which is usually about April, then we do employ them as substitutes for the rest of the year. We have them work every day. We get to know them. We encourage them to apply. We wait until the job process has been finalized, and then we interview for openings. Substitutes, I'll be honest, most of our certified substitutes are not looking at the moment for a permanent job. If you're a certified teacher right now and you want a full-time job, you have a full-time job. And we try to encourage them. We try to lure them. We certainly want them to sub, but can say with pretty much certainty that if you are a certified substitute and you want a job, you can have one.
So, and just to piggyback on that, so you see there's two different, when you're hiring a sub after the job assignment and things like that, you're hiring them for a position that needs to be filled. What I was talking about too, that we've talked about in our wish list is, like I said, they do in Massachusetts, in some of the districts, they actually hire, they call them permanent subs, so that they're site-based at a building and they're getting benefits. So that would be.
They show up to work every day.
Yes, yes.
And they step into a
And
position.
that would be something wise to look at as we're going forward, because like we know, as we stated earlier, there is a staffing shortage, and we're not seeing, a lot of high schools going into the field of education. Yeah. Okay. Yes, Melissa, you can talk.
Okay, so FY23 revenue. You can find what I'm about to speak to on page 4 in the packet, the budget packet. The state aid, including categorical funding, is projected at $95,682,830, or 72.31% of the budget. Although the governor recommended, and I stated this earlier, the hold harmless state aid at FY20 or 21 generally, the categorical funding is reduced in total by $149,000. And if you look on page 4, you'll see that we are getting a reduction in the high cost special ed by $74,000. We're getting an increase in the English language learner, or MLL, by $21,000. The school choice, we're getting a decrease of $74,000, and the group home aid, a decrease of $17,000. The group home decrease usually results in closure of available beds within the city of Pawtucket. In addition, as I mentioned earlier, if the school districts across the state are not held harmless for charter growth tuition, Pawtucket could be reduced by an additional $626,000 in state aid from what is presented this evening. So what's presented this evening, we incorporate a reduction of 626. We're hoping that the governor will stay fully funded by holding us harmless across the board, other than the school choice. The city appropriation to be considered is $34,103,286, or 25.77% of the budget. This number, it includes an increase of $1,297,349 from the city's FY22 contribution, which is a 3.95% increase. Even if we wanted to add teachers and if there was a wonder well of money floating around, we couldn't ask for more than 4% from the city. And the last section of the aid, which is actually on the top of the document on page 4, is made up of $2,540,398, or 1.92% of our budget. This majority of this revenue is derived from the Medicaid reimbursements. Those are for services for special education students that we receive Medicaid reimbursement for, and JMW tuition from other districts. Now, a question I did have on this, if you look on the document and the actual posted through March 11th, you'll see under other income, you'll see a huge number, but the budget is really low. That huge number is a result of $88,000 in a rebate or a dividend from our insurance company we received this year that was not budgeted, but we did get a dividend check. That doesn't always occur, but it is related to prior year after they reconcile and tie out our actual numbers at the end of a year. The Beacon offered a dividend, and our share was about $88,000. So that check gets deposited in as other income because it's related to prior year. Okay, projected budget cost impacts. These are the operations. These are the non-salary, non-benefit cost. And as you can see, the very first item is the charter and out of district CTE programs is almost $712,000 in increase. We're asking for 1.2, and of that 1.2, 712,000 are related to something out of our control. In this budget, it represents 170 additional students when we compared it to the budget we presented last April. The charter and state tuition is currently $2,829. That is our share. That to send the student to the charter and state school, and I've included in the budget a 2% rate increase. This rate is calculated pursuant to Rhode Island General Law 16-7.2-5. CTE tuition rate is the district, state, and local per pupil with an increase in state funding share for poverty students. In this budget, we have a mix of students that are poverty and non-poverty. Those are the schools where you have school choice and they can choose to go to the East Providence, to the North Providence, Cumberland. Those students, we pay full price based on the funding formula for students to attend those schools. We can't deny them. Our increase in students that are both charter, mayoral academy, state school, and school choice, and that's the other school districts that have funding, have programs that our students would like to attend, increased from last year's budget of the 2,066 students to 2,239 students. We had that many students going out of the district for those programs. I will say this. So currently in this year budget, with the projection from RIDE about growth as in numbers, not in the state aid end of things, is 2,239 versus last year when at this time when we budgeted, we had projected 2,066. We might not have had the numbers that they were projecting for an increase, so that maybe that's why there's 170.
So in answer to Ms. Grant's question, so we were saying we have like 350 students. That's 170. And then you said 150 for,
So we're getting close to that number. So am I correct that we don't have as much? I mean, I know that Providence has just I don't want to call it another district, but they've said in the news that they have students, they don't know where they are. Like they just have students who are just missing that we don't know why they aren't showing up. They aren't going to another school. They aren't declaring their homeschooling. They're just not there. And they put that number at a few hundred. We're not seeing that right now.
No, I think our administrators do a really good job to track all their students. With that being said, I'm certain that there probably are students that are not attending, and they are what we would call truant, and we follow that process.
But they're on our rolls.
But they're on our rolls, right. But I do want to speak to one thing that about this. So, and I lost my thought because I was going to say it before. It was in regards to when we talk about students leaving our district for these other programs, particularly the CTE programs. This is why it is really important for us to have programs at our high school. And I know we're in that whole discussion about that, but this is why you have to have vision for the future, because if you don't stop building the programs now, you can't wait and say, well, we might have this one high school down the road, so let's just stick with what we have. No, we need to work with what we have, increase our CTE programs like we are doing, so that we can keep more of our students here while we're in the process, which is why it's so important for us to move forward with a high school that has a significant amount of programs that students want to attend. Yes.
That's right.
So if a student wants to go to East Providence High School, how do they go about it? So they have to, I'm assuming they would have to go for, obviously they can't go for arts because we have JMW here, correct?
No, so that's
Or
what,
they can
so
go
the
for
way it
anything.
works, the way it works in CTE and school choice for state law, students can go where they want. However, I will say that we don't tend to, because we do have JMW for the arts, we don't tend to see students going for the arts. Right now at East Providence High School, the process is they go there, they get an application, they fill out the application, they have a document that they bring to the school department, which I, as superintendent, signs, and it will say what they're going for. For the East Providence, because it's a brand new school, we're seeing they have the automotive there, they have the new RICO, what is it with the, what is that new program with the, culinary, but there's the ambulance, EMT. That's, we're seeing that. So it's those particular fields that we're seeing. Those are the high needs.
But even if our district did have these CTEs,
They
they
still,
still have the option to go out. So there's no guarantee that these students are either going to stay here. They still have that option to
Right.
move out. Okay. I didn't realize they could just move out.
What is interesting though, and so this is just some numbers that I've seen, is that East Providence has actually drawn students from Barrington and from, so one of the things that, and not just Barrington, but across the state, one of the items that we've seen, and I know that some school districts have been slow to the draw. I do think Pawtucket has a decent CTE, but there are the powerhouses of North Kingston, Pawtucket, who were right out of the gate. And so now those surrounding districts are kind of trying to say, well, can we possibly offer the same thing? And there is some movement back, but also they're seeing just students just interested in going to other districts, which is an interesting thing. But like I said, even really well-respected school districts like Barrington that you wouldn't think people would school choice out of, actually looking to go to surrounding CTE programs. What I would like is if we can get the numbers for Davies.
not 194.
Actually, we have 486.
Not just the number of our students going there, but just in general, how their enrollment has changed, because there were predictions,
It's dropped.
it has dropped.
Yeah.
We
There
are
were-
probably the biggest, biggest group there, and I think if all of our students came back to a new high school, just saying,
Yeah.
they might not be around.
Because one of the things that was interesting when charter schools opened was that the Catholic schools saw one of the biggest drops because it was students who were already districting out, looking for a free alternative. And the prediction was that with East Providence opening and other CTE programs, the Davies was going to see a drop, and that they did see that drop this year. Thank you.
Absolutely, I can see it. At one point, in my tenure here, we had about 545 students at Davies. We're down to 486. That's a big drop.
Ms. Grant?
We do have quite a few students in our district that is still on their waiting list.
They're on the wait list.
They're on their
But
waiting
Mhm.
list. So it's either other districts that are pulling them in, or they don't have the staff to
Yeah.
Well, that's what I
keep
think.
it up.
I think
Because we do have they do have quite a few students from Pawtucket who did apply that are on their waiting list.
And we just have a lower
We just have
enrollment.
a lower percentage from our district that's getting accepted.
Right.
You know, that's basically what it is.
Mr. Knight?
One of the problems with Davies is Pawtucket we're mandated to send a certain amount of people there because by state law. And that's something that Pawtucket didn't drop the ball on when they built Davies. My question besides that is this: how much tuition income are we getting from Jackie Walsh?
So to project next year, the revenue on page 4. Hold on, page 4.
Is that the 1.2 million?
Yep, so we're projecting 1,205,603.
And that's not of district placement.
That's from other districts because our students, obviously, we don't charge for our in-district students. That's how much revenue comes in. Last year, we budgeted 1,147,000, so we're about 58,000 higher.
So my next follow-up on that is, what kind of a drop are we projecting for JMW if we move it into the unified high school?
I wouldn't know how to project that. I can't see why the program would change. It would be in a new school. It would be, I don't know if there would be a drop. I couldn't really say. Maybe because we'd have more CTE programs available, kids might choose other, but I don't know that it'd necessarily be a drop. East Providence built a new high school and more students are going there. So if we had an arts program inside a brand new facility with state-of-the-art, dance rooms and whatever other arts are out there, maybe they would increase. I don't know that there would necessarily be a decrease, and I wouldn't know how you would project that.
Ms. Manolo?
Is there a plan to increase the enrollment in JMW this year?
Well, we have a regular amount that we to go above and beyond what we normally do.
Mhm.
No.
We don't have the capabilities of doing that?
Well, I think that right now they're housed in the school and they have a program that's, set and working and functional. And so I wouldn't want to be increasing the numbers and being concerned about additional staffing and space.
Okay.
Melissa, did you want to go on to the student transportation? We're back on cost impacts increases.
Sure. So student transportation is about a $300,000 increase in this budget. It represents district contractual increase for first student, our in-district vendor, and then 2 buses are added for Baldwin students. The reason you see only 2 buses is we already have buses that were added for winter students in the lot. So we would not be, I think Lee was at 7 back when you were doing transportation, 6 or 7 buses. So 2 additional buses would be needed to accommodate the students that are leaving to go back to the winter school and any of those that we're moving from Baldwin and those that are going to need transportation.
Ms. Grant?
So, Ms. Devine, in regards to busing, so the district is responsible for, the students that we have within, certain miles. How does it work with the statewide? So I know that please correct me if I'm wrong, each district pays so much to the state every year for statewide?
So the way
For the
the
students who go
Right.
out of the district.
So the way the statewide works, it depends. So let's just take an easy example. Let's just say North Providence and Pawtucket, who border each other, are busing to a school, maybe in Cumberland, or whatever districts that they go by. Depending on the number of students that are on that bus, they calculate a percentage of share. So if we have this equal amount of students, 50-50, we pay 50% of that cost, and the other district does. Through the year, that gets updated. They have staff down there. I will say that the program has there's kind of a little hole in the program. I think there's been some turnover in staff and the oversight of that area. But as far as the costing, they update it every month. So we could essentially be a 50% cost of the bus, and then the other students from the other district, half of them drop off. Now we own 75% of the bus, and they only own 25%.
What happens with the homeless students and the special needs students? So I know those buses go right to the doors for both those students. So does it work the same way in regards to how many, well, the students would all be from our district. So, but I'm assuming they're statewide buses. So do we just pay one fee to the state for that?
They have a per pupil that they break it down to based on what they negotiate for a contract. They actually have two contracts. They actually have the busing contract, and I believe they use multiple vendors. And then they also have a third-party administrator that administers and does all that calculation with the busing and the routing. That's called, I can't remember the name of them, but that's a third. So what they're doing is they're charging on, and then they have a person down at RIDE that kind of oversees that. So what we're doing is whatever they negotiate and bid in the contract is, then they're divvying out those costs by per pupil. So it's per pupil to, per pupil from.
So do we, in regards to homeless students, so say we have a foster family here in Pawtucket, but the students are originally from Central Falls. Who pays?
I'm actually going to turn that question over to Lynn or Lee.
Each district pays, so Nash district pays half.
She's saying each district pays half.
Each
pays
district
half.
would pay half of that.
Split it.
Okay.
So when this busing,
District where the child is living, the child has the choice to go to either school department, and the school departments, if they're busing from one school department, so the child lives in Pawtucket, but they're going to school in Central Falls and Pawtucket tell statewide they're splitting the cost. The difference is in the case of ESSA, which is your DCYF students, the district who is the LEA pays both costs. So if you have a DCYF student who's living in Middletown and they're going to school in Pawtucket, Pawtucket pays that full cost.
Yes.
So really, that amount can change
Every day.
It could change daily.
You just watch a trend. My staff keeps it on a spreadsheet. I work with Lynn, and we look at, what's going on with it for analysis purposes. But to get down into that nitty gritty, oh my God, it's like ginormous with all the kids, who's on, who's off, who signs up. It's monstrous.
But essentially on your side, it comes as a bill every month?
Yep, it comes as a bill each month to the transportation department, and then they sign off on it. We take a peek at the cost, make sure they're obviously reasonable. We look at the students that are on it. If anything jumps out, we ask the question and they'll respond back. But in there by groups, CTE, special ed.
Mr. Knight?
We're doing pickups by drop-off points. We're not doing house to house on these different cities, are we?
Yeah, I believe there's addresses that in bus stops you are. If you have special education students, yeah.
On special ed, we're doing that, I know. I'm talking about, like, there's probably 7 kids that go to Cumberland. And they're dropped off at the Armistice Boulevard Plaza every day.
You mean they might have depot stops? You're right. They might have depot, but not everybody has a depot stop.
We have one also on Newport. I don't know where the one on Newport Avenue is, but there's one at Berrien. But, so I just want everybody to know, they're not doing door to door. Special ed's different.
I believe I was talking about special ed and homeless.
Yeah,
I
right.
wasn't talking about district-wide students taking the bus.
Would you like to go on? Could you go to the next slide?
Okay, special education support services and tuition. The increase departmental is about 106,000. This represents an decrease in nursing by 200,000, and this is based on current year services needed. We worked out with the new special ed director, and we took a look at the current usage, and we realized that we should be able to reduce that by 200. But at the same time, we have a projected increase for out-of-district tuitions, and that's related to some rate increase, a small rate increase, and additional seats at out-of-district placements. Curriculum, we cut it, it's almost cut in half from at 223 in a decrease. The reason that we're allowed to do this is that we have ESSER funding and RIDE funding supporting curriculum. There's a piece in there that RIDE does support and has for the last year or so. And the next area that was really detrimental to the budget is a 425,000 decrease in technology. The ability to recognize that savings is hardware. We reduced the hardware because we were able to use ESSER and some prior year savings that we earmarked for some hardware. And in addition, we received a grant to allow students to have a device at home.
So I'm just going to jump in there because I think this is a good point too, since you brought that up. We do have those devices are starting to come in. Hirsch, Lee, and Lisa are working on a plan to roll those out as they're coming in, starting with the secondary, but also to roll them out with a procedure. So one of the things that we know, we've had this district's been fortunate because of the school committee and also because of grant funding and the vision to know how important it is for us to have these one-to-one devices, but we also need to know that we have to make sure that our students are held accountable for these devices. And I know we've talked about it previously at other meetings as far as damages. And so it's with this now, these students are going to have a device in school and they're going to have one at home. However, that at home, as Melissa stated, is being funded by a grant. We need to make sure that we have procedure in place, offer insurance, and have a plan that there's going to be some responsibility on the part of the families, because we won't be able to, replace these at-home devices. Next one is.
Oh, Mr. Knight, sorry.
Are we going to ask the families to provide the insurance?
We're working that out right now. We will be looking at trying to offer at a small nominal cost some insurance for families. It wouldn't be a lot more, but we're discussing that right now.
But it wouldn't be required?
It wouldn't be required. It would be optional. But it would be
Then
liable.
the kid's family would be liable if any damage happened,
So if there's insurance,
if there is an insurance.
or if there isn't insurance, then that's what I'm saying. We're working on a procedure so that that we have something in place to be able to fix, and families can be responsible for them.
Is there going to be a report to the school committee coming on that?
Even as far as a procedure?
So I just made a note here that I believe that the policy subcommittee, because we do have a policy currently, Hirsch is shaking his head. Currently, we do have a policy that mentions damages, mentions the Chromebook use in school. So I would imagine that this would go to the policy subcommittee to add language around the home device, and then there will be a procedure in carrying it out. But I'm just making a note right now to talk to Mr. Larby about having that go, and then that would come to the school committee. Is that your question, Mr. Knight?
What's the company we're going to use? That's my question. Are we putting it out for bid or?
Yep.
One of the companies that goes through the Rhode Island Trust is the Worth Ave companies, which is the ones that most districts here in Pawtucket, in Rhode Island uses. in-house.
Ms. Devine, and then,
That program that you're talking about,
Mhm.
those repairs, that's if, accidental dropping. It's not if vandalism occurs, right? Someone
There's-
rips off the screen.
There's different levels,
Right,
so
okay.
depending on the plan, so there's theft, there's fire, there's, vandalism, the different plans that they have. We would be looking at, the all-inclusive plan because typically the damages we're getting are vandalism.
Right.
It's-
And because I know that in my district, when my kids were still in school, we purchased at our, if we wanted, we purchased insurance, but it wasn't if, my child destroyed the computer, maliciously. It was if you dropped it, broke a screen, or,
We're looking at the different plans because some of them, you're right, if a key's pulled off, that's not just normal happen, that's vandalism. And then, now, it's funny in the insurance business because me taking your Chromebook and ripping your key off your Chromebook, that's covered. You taking your own key and popping it off is not covered. So it's that same thing, like self-done and whatever, but that's the insurance lingo. But yeah, the type of things we get, normally, like repairs that happen in the school where somebody falls and gets hurt and things like that. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about I put my pen in my thing, I broke it, or I dropped through it, or I pulled keys off. That kind of damage is typically not covered.
I don't have the policy meeting schedule right in front of me, but I know Ms. Liz can get that. Hirsch, do you think you can make yourself available to
Sure.
get that? And we can try to get that so that, the school committee, when it comes back to us with policy, we can also have the answers to Mr. Knight's questions,
And I
as
think-
well as implications for moving forward.
How much is that in the budget for now, damages to computers?
Yeah, so right now, we've had about $30,000 in the budget right now. I will say that one of the things that we've been lucky over the last couple of years is that we've had devices that come end of life. So what we do is we're very thrifty, so we don't get rid of the devices if we can reuse their screens. So we've been able to take screens from others, so it's been able to lower the cost. Going forward, we're not going to be so lucky because we've gone from having about 7,000 devices that we used to have in the schools, in the carts, to we're over 20,000 devices. So once these devices go home, there will be very few devices to take to replace others, or things like that. So we'll be buying those supplies. And I do want to say, Jefferson Doobie, I think a lot of the thing, I think that policy meeting will be a pretty quick one, because I think it's the policy itself. When we had at that time, we pretty much already covered those things in there. But it's just coming down to when it happens, we keep a sheet, and I'd be more than happy to submit this to the next meeting for people to see the last month's worth of repairs, what kind of things we get.
So can I just add one thing? So Hirsch mentioned how end-of-life computers, and he'll salvage screens, but I've also seen, I've been down in his department, and I've seen in there that even something that's vandalized or destroyed, if there's something good on it, they're taking it off.
Yeah, we cannibalize it. We're like a chop shop
Yeah.
for cars, but
Yeah,
it's really
exactly.
that.
So in other words, if somebody damages or ripped off the top of the screen, and the keys are good, so, I mean, they'll save the keys or whatever, but again, they're utilizing everything they can.
And I will mention, one of the things that kind of, that Mr. Knight was saying, how much is in there, for repairs. One of the things that's tough to attribute is the time it takes. So when we do a repair and the screen's $40, the screen's $40, but the time it takes for somebody to repair it is the part that doesn't get factored in there, right? So if it takes somebody a bit of time, that screen repair was more, but we just charged, to get it up and running. So I just want to be truthful. If we were to send it out or to sub it out, it would be a lot more money. So.
Ms. Bonello?
So out of the 30,000 for in-house damages, how much have you received in reimbursements from the families?
This year? I would say, I could get the number for you, but I would say probably about $100 of things like that. It's a tough, I'm not saying that there's an easy answer to it. You know, we get the device, so we look at it as our role, like in the IT, we get the device and we try to repair it and get it back to, you know, the school as soon as possible so that they, you know, whatever, it doesn't affect the learning going on. But to say, if I didn't say it's not frustrating, I'd be lying and stuff because it is tough.
Can we look at the cost of a blanket insurance?
We could, and it would probably be about $500,000. Because you got to understand what happens when you do something like that. You're covering, insurance is insurance, right? You're covering everything, whether something happens or doesn't happen. I would not recommend that because we don't have that kind of damage, you know, and we would be spending a lot of money that I'd rather you give me another $500,000, you know, than to spend it on that because we'd be buying devices and things like that. So I would say that truthfully, it wouldn't be worth it because you'd be spending money on devices that don't end up getting, you know.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Facilities budget, we were able to reduce by a little over $500,000, $508,956. The largest areas of savings in this section of the budget was 150,000 savings in electricity for solar credits or in the anticipated light retrofitting. If you guys remember back a few months, we brought before you a recommendation to move forward with retrofitting the lights in a number of schools. I think it's 5 or 6 locations. So with that, plus the new winter school and things like that, we're banking on saving 150,000. A 200,000 decrease in the maintenance and repairs for the HVAC. It was related for Curvin. Those were projected in the budget last year, those costs, if the larger construction project did not move forward timely. So if you may or may not remember, the Curvin project was set to be sometime maybe when the pandemic first hit, and it got a little delayed, and we weren't sure with the lead time and things like that last year when we were preparing the budget. John wanted to ensure that if it did not go as projected, it would have required him to invest in some generator, heaters, things like that. And then the last section is a decrease of 115,000 for fire safety services due to negotiated contract less than the budget projection. And if you have any questions on that, John's here to answer those questions. Okay, so here's the area not operational. This is the salaries and benefits. This is the biggest area of our budget. And I have to say, I am not a fan, and I'll say this forever until I retire. I am not a fan of budgeting breakage, but at this, we have no choice. We do know it happens. Salaries increase of 889,000 is for contractual obligations, anticipated breakage, for staff turnover, including some possible retirements. Nothing definite. Again, this is across the board. I, looked at some analysis, did some sharing, and that's between CERT and non-CERT. 232,000 are cut right out on the bottom for anticipated breakage. Health and dental, 79,000 increase. It includes a 600,000 breakage due to staff turnover and a healthy medical fund with a 2% working rate increase at this time due to the working rates are not yet released. You look at that number and I sounded really, I sounded scared at 232. I'm not as scared at 600 because we've had the healthy medical But we also have employees that we've been trying to keep the working rate down because they too share in getting some of that healthy back while, having a lower cost to their medical co-share. So with that being said, we put in a 2% increase in the working rate. I have no idea. I mean, average increases range anywhere in my career from 5 to 12%. There's no room to put 5 to 12%. So we put the 2% in so we could actually see what it looked like across all of the plans. But 600,000, am I nervous? I'm a little nervous, not as nervous as the 232, but we do have a healthy medical fund. The employer pension contributions and FICA tax, a 297,000 increase represents the contractual salary obligations and their related state employer rates, an anticipated breakage of 53,000. The 53,000 is the benefits related to the 232 breakage.
Mr. Knight?
What is our medical fund balance right now?
It was last year at the close of the year, we had a slight loss. I want to say it's a little over 6 million. We did, the last year we were keeping the cost down, but we did say that it was going to we're going to start to use that healthy medical plan up by keeping the rates down. So workers' compensation is a 29,000 estimated increase. Planned is approximately 5%. Renewal rates are not yet released. Again, we are early in the year. Usually the rates, we don't usually get them until sometime in May.
Bid on that, or are we going through Beacon?
Nope, we're using Beacon.
Okay, Beacon is not a state agency any longer.
I understand. Okay, so the investment in school building improvements, and so this is more about, where we've been, a little background just to look at it. So while COVID generated healthy surplus balances over the last 2 years, the district in the previous three years resulted in 0.5 to 3/4% of the total budget, which is a small amount. The COVID surplus allowed the school committee to fund school bonds for 1 year in the amount of approximately 1.6 million. With those 0.5 to 3/4% surpluses, the school committee created a capital reserve fund, which was highly recommended by RIDE. The district's surplus were transferred to the capital reserve fund. This fund has allowed PSD to invest in the district school properties and to take advantage of school improvement programs offered by RIDE. The SPA and the PAYGO initiatives funded with capital reserves in the amount of 21.8 million awarded to Pawtucket over the last 6 years. This is separate from the most recent PAYGO for the $220 million bonds. So over the last 6 years, we received awards to do projects worth 21.8 million, and we funded it with those surpluses that the school committee voted to put into a capital fund creation, much more than in any other districts across the state. We also use the capital reserves to fund and contribute funding for swing space property. If you remember, the original St. Leo school that we used as our first swing space, the city owns all properties, but the city purchased the building. We did contribute, I can't remember off the top of my head, I want to say 100,000, but the school department used the capital reserve fund to purchase the rectory and the church for additional swing space, and that was 800,000. So all of the surpluses have not been used to balance the budget. They have been used to reinvest in either equipment. I just mentioned on a previous slide that we bought some additional hardware. We bought equipment. We've invested in vehicles. We've made improvements to the building as much as we can. So the school committee is not using their surplus. And again, I know you're all sitting here, but I'm talking through a public thing, so everybody knows what is happening with the surplus of the school department. It is going back into the buildings. It's going back into the areas. If we did not have approvals on hand or the money to do it, we would not be this far ahead in the construction that's going on in this district.
And Melissa, I want to thank you and I want to thank John and your team as well, because as we've seen, the ride has come before us and said it. I know that people were able to go to the state announcement as well, but the state has made these programs available, but a lot of districts have not been able to take advantage of them because they do not have the capital fund to do so. And because of the recommendation that we do this, which came, I believe, from you and
Team.
yeah, and from the whole team, that recommendation to invest in this capital, we have for years now been doing what a lot of districts are just saying this year, we might want to start doing this. And I think that it's really wonderful that we've been able to make these investments.
I'm glad too. It's good. And that's it. Thank you. It's a team effort. So I don't know if you all want to walk through the document to maybe point out some questions you might have in some individual lines. I don't know if you want to take it home and come back and discuss it at your next meeting.
I think we can handle this a lot like we handle our other discussion items at this point, where if someone has a question that they'd like to address in the document that they received, they can raise their hand and we can address it now. We can give a couple minutes for people to flip through before before we move on to the next item, which is public participation, which do not have anyone signed up for. So before we move to that and adjournment, so I don't want to rush anyone here. So let's just yes.
This is a public hearing. Anybody that wants to be heard can be heard.
Mhm.
They
Right.
don't have to sign up for it.
But we do have public participation on our agenda as well.
That's fine. This
Okay.
is a public hearing.
Yes. So yeah, at this point, anyone who has a question or comment,
On the 80, the 80, the
73,000 for.
Oh, yeah, so let's talk about that. Yeah, so the uniforms line, and actually it's funny because the athletic director came in to see me today, but I had another meeting, he's coming back tomorrow, but, so UCOA, Uniform Chart of Accounts, requires, believe it or not, they're so detailed in every which way, but they're not detailed in uniform and supplies. So uniforms that you wear and the supplies like the baseballs and the bats and the tennis balls and the, the nets for, yeah, all of that gear, all of that goes under uniforms and supplies. The only thing that separates it out, and you know what, I will look to putting a sub tab in the future, the sport, you can see by sport. That's the only breakdown that they give you. So whereas they were so detailed everywhere else, the uniforms and the supplies are combined. So that could be for anywhere from the hats, the socks, the visors, to the equipment itself, the small equipment.
So the other thing, you could probably find it, what it was and what it is this year. I think it was 26,000 last year,
The what? The
expense.
for athletics?
Yeah,
So yeah, because of COVID, they did not spend. And then I believe I talked to Dino today, and one of the things that the reason for the increase is they really do need all. They have not had new soccer uniforms for girls and boys, and they would like to. He included that in the budget. There's a few other uniforms that need some replacement because sometimes when the uniforms get passed out, sometimes they don't come back. So they do have to have some replenishment. They try to hold off. They usually have a few extra, but he's at the point where he said, in looking at the inventory and being new at it, he said that there's some things that he needs to replace.
Ms. Vanilla, you all done with that question? Ms. Grant also has a question.
yeah, so superintendent, you wanted a district-wide band and a district-wide choral group. Those uniforms were not considered in your $73,000, correct?
Correct.
Those
Those programs are in the ESSA.
So those programs are in the ESSA funds, and I'm not, we have to look at it a little bit closer because it's been a while since we submitted the application, but I don't think we actually included clothing.
Yeah, I think you did.
We did, do we include, I think shirts, right? Yes, shirts, t-shirts.
For the band?
Yes,
anything for the choral, because it'd be really nice. if
Yes,
we had a
yes.
choral group to have uniform.
Yes, I'm hearing a yes
It
on
was
the
in there, I
t-shirts.
remember.
Yes.
Thank you.
Ms. Grant, you had a question?
Divine, didn't, we, a couple of years ago, either receive a donation or a grant? I believe it might have been a donation for one of our sports teams, and they received all new, for some reason, I think it was the football team at Shea. They received all new uniforms, one of the sports teams.
I'm trying to remember back, it does sound.
And someone had
familiar.
made a
Let me-
donation.
Yeah, someone had made a donation, and I believe it was football. I could check on that though for you, but I do recall it. I just don't remember the score, but I think you
Yeah.
might be right.
And I think it was Shea. For some reason, I think it was Shea.
Yeah,
but
I
I
want to
do-
say, because at the time,
Dina was the coach.
Coach, right.
'Cause I think I
I do think it
remember,
was, yes.
yeah,
I'm
and they
gonna check on
received
that when I talk to
all
them.
new uniforms.
I wrote it down.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I left my pen in my proper spot.
Mr. Knight?
What's the process for buying new uniforms, et cetera? Baseballs, bats, stuff like that?
So
Is that just up to the athletic director?
Yeah, so the athletic director, I actually sat down with them and I said to them, listen, if you have a group of things, why don't we sit down and, they take, like, as far as the uniforms, I'll give you, for instance, cheerleading. Cheerleading has become a competition. So, Dino or Frank, they don't really know what the cheerleaders want. So they try to get some input from the kids, and the coaches too. Dino's not an expert on picking out the cheerleading uniforms that are, because again, he's not really involved in the competition and what they have out there. So they do take in account of the students, the coaches. They take the input from everyone to look at that stuff. I don't know exactly. I can find out what the process is, but
Who's controlling the expenditures?
you mean for the uniforms and things like that? It comes out of our
Yeah,
budget.
but how are we determining that it's being properly spent?
I'm not sure I understand. They have to put a purchase order in. They have to go through our system. They have to put the purchase order in, the purchase request, get the quotes, and all of that stuff. They have to go through our system. They're not, years ago, it was my understanding they used to use their student activity checkbook. The only thing that's in their checkbook for student activity is their, they use that for some dues occasionally, and we reimburse them. But they also have their, do they call that a round robin or injury fund games? And those things, they pay for some medical stuff or things like that out of that fund. But as far as purchasing anything that's in this local budget, it all comes through our system. It's automated. They have to put in the purchase order. They have to have their quotes.
So we would see it on our vendor report then?
Yeah, when you see some of those sports vendors, it's for that. They do go through that. But they do buy, and that's one of the things I want to work with Dino, with this being Dino's first year, maybe this summer. They do buy by season, and sometimes because we had multiple directors before, they were buying individually for each of their own schools. I'd like to try to combine that to see if we can get them bought at the same time and bulk it up a little, or bidding it, getting it to a point where you can bid it. Because when you're doing something you only need to get price quotes, it's two different schools and they have two different people, two different teams. They're really two different purchases. I'd like to group that together as a single purchase. And even though they're ordering different colors, maybe the uniforms are similar.
And that's what you're working with the athletic director on?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'd like to work with him on that.
Mr. Marino?
Yeah, Chair, if I could
1 second.
just ask that the slideshow be sent out to everybody, please.
Absolutely, we will. We will send that in the morning, first thing.
Thank you, Mr. Marino.
Thank you.
I'm seeing no other questions. Once again, I don't want to rush people. If we're good, moving on to public participation. Yep. And this will be on the agenda for the next meeting as well. So if something comes up between this meeting and next meeting, April 12th, that then obviously, that, can be addressed.
If it's okay, I mean, if there's any questions that come up, you can send them and then we'll read them out at the next meeting.
That's a,
This way, if you have the questions in advance, I'm happy to take them and then I'll put them all together and we'll read them at the next meeting. So that way it might help to move it along, or if someone has the same question, we'll read out the entire list.
okay, wonderful. So the next item on our agenda is public participation. Ms. Liz, you said there was no one signed up for public participation. We'll move on to our final item, adjournment. Motion to adjourn by Ms. Benola, it's been seconded by Ms. Grant. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries, and we are adjourned at 7:23.